The day of my birthday started the same way most of my days had for years. I woke up before my husband, listened to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, and set the coffee to brew. The kitchen lights were soft and warm, and for a moment, I let myself pretend that routine meant stability. That night, in a private room at a high-end steakhouse downtown, my husband stood at the head of a long table, raised his glass, and smiled at a room full of people who belonged to him, not to me. Friends, colleagues, partners. Their laughter already lived in their throats, like they were waiting for a cue. He looked straight at me and said, calm as if he were reading a weather report, "Congrats, sweetheart. You failed. We're done." The room burst open with laughter. Glasses clinked. Someone whooped like it was a roast they'd paid to attend. To his right sat the woman he'd been seeing, close enough that her hand rested on his arm like she'd earned the spot. I noticed her nails first. Pale, perfect, untouched by any kind of real work. I didn't cry. I didn't stand up and make a scene. I didn't ask him why, because I already knew there was no honest answer coming. I reached into my purse, pulled out a small black envelope, and slid it across the polished wood toward him. "Before you keep going," I said, quietly enough that the table had to lean in to hear me, "you might want to explain a few things to your family." Phones started buzzing almost immediately after that. Not mine. Theirs. I walked out while people were still trying to laugh, still trying to decide if what I'd done was part of the entertainment. I didn't look back. But if you want to understand how I got to that room, how I sat there with my heart oddly steady, you have to know what the years before it felt like. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind with one main street and a grocery store that closes early. My mom worked double shifts as a hospital nurse after my dad died, and she learned to move through life without asking anyone to rescue her. Watching her taught me something simple. If you stay calm, people assume you're fine. And if people assume you're fine, they stop paying attention. I carried that habit into school. I was the quiet one who got the answers right, not the loud one, not the one teachers worried about. I learned to listen more than I spoke, and I got good at noticing patterns in what people said and what they avoided saying. In graduate school, that turned into numbers, models, code. I liked the way markets looked chaotic until you stared long enough to see the structure underneath. I could sit for hours with a data set and feel my mind settle, like putting a room back in order. That's where I met my husband. In a campus networking event with cheap wine and name tags that kept peeling off. His name then was Graham Whitaker, and he had the kind of easy confidence that made people angle their bodies toward him without realizing they were doing it. He wasn't brilliant in the way my professors were brilliant. He was ambitious. He could sell a future. He could walk into a room, talk about vision and growth, and leave people feeling like they'd just been offered a seat on a moving train. When he said he wanted to build something with me, I believed him. When he said partnership meant we'd rise together, I believed that too. We married, moved into a big house outside the city, and settled into a life that looked impressive from the sidewalk. Tall windows, clean landscaping, a neighborhood where people waved like they were practicing for a brochure. For a long time, my days had a familiar shape. I woke early, made his coffee strong and black, poured it into the same mug he liked, and laid out shirts that were pressed and exact. He would come downstairs already half inside his phone, kiss my cheek without really stopping, and leave with the calm certainty of someone who thought the world was arranged for his convenience. At the firm he founded, Whitaker Capital, I worked beside him. Not officially in the way people respected. Officially, I kept things organized. I handled scheduling. That's what he told people when he introduced me. The truth was quieter. The system that drove the firm's best trades, the one investors whispered about like it was magic, came from my laptop. I built it in our home office at night, when the house was still and my brain was finally mine again. I wrote the code. I tested it. I fixed what broke. I refined it until it could see signals other people missed. During the day, Graham stood in glass conference rooms and explained the results with words he'd memorized from me. He had a way of speaking that made simple things sound profound. People loved him for it. I smiled. I refilled coffee cups during presentations. I sat just outside the circle while he collected praise that should have been shared. And for longer than I want to admit, I told myself that was what love looked like. Making myself small so he could feel large, carrying the weight so he could carry the credit. The first real crack didn't come with an argument. It came with a file. A few months before my birthday, I was backing up our home server the way he insisted we do for security. The screen cast a pale light across the desk, and the house smelled faintly like the lemon cleaner I'd used earlier. I was clicking through folders when I saw one I'd never noticed before. It was buried deep and labeled with one short word: restructure. I opened it. Inside were draft org charts and internal notes, the kind people write when they assume they'll never be caught. Graham's name sat at the top, bold and centered. A new Chief Strategy Officer was listed beneath him. And then, where my name should have been, there was nothing. Not operations, not technology, not support. Just empty space, like I'd never existed. I leaned back in the chair and listened to the hard drive quietly ticking, like a clock keeping time for something I didn't want to face yet. Then I sat there, very still, and kept reading. I didn't close the folder right away. I sat there in the office chair with the screen in front of me and the rest of the house dark, like it was holding its breath. My first instinct was to doubt myself, the way you do when something hurts and you want it to be a misunderstanding. But the documents weren't vague. They were organized. Dates, headings, notes in the margins. It wasn't a moment of anger typed out in a rush. It was planning. There was even a short memo titled Transition Timeline. In neutral language, it talked about streamlining and removing redundant rules after personal matters were finalized. The phrase sat there like a clean label on something ugly. Personal matters meant me. I backed out of the folder, shut the laptop, and went upstairs. Graham was asleep on his side of the bed, facing away, breathing evenly like he'd earned rest. I stood there a moment, watching the rise and fall of his shoulder, and I felt something in me go quiet. Not numb, more like focused. In the morning, I still made the coffee, not because I felt loyal, because routine was cover, and I'd been practicing cover my whole life. Graham came down already dressed, phone in hand, one thumb moving fast. He took a sip of coffee without tasting it. His eyes didn't lift from the screen. "I need you at the office early," he said. "We've got a lunch with a new group, big potential. Make sure the conference room's perfect." "Okay," I said, like always. He kissed my cheek with the same absent motion you might use to close a door, then walked out. The drive into the city felt longer that day. Rain had left the streets dark and shiny, and the sky sat low over the buildings. When I got to the office, I started doing what I always did: checking the room, arranging the folders, testing the projector, putting water glasses at the right places so nobody would have to ask. While I was lining up the leather portfolios, I heard voices in the hallway outside the glass wall. Two of the newer executives, young, confident, loud enough to be careless. "He's bringing in his old friend from college," one of them said. "He's going to be the new strategist. That's what I heard." "Finally," the other replied and laughed. "About time." There was a pause, and then the first one said, "So what happens to her?" The second one didn't answer right away, like he was savoring it. "She's still playing assistant," he said. "You know how this works." They didn't see me standing there. The glass reflected the conference room more than the hallway. I kept my face still and my hands steady, but I felt the words land in my ribs, heavy and blunt. Furniture. That's what I was to them. Something useful until it wasn't. The investor lunch went exactly the way it always did. Graham performed, people leaned toward him. He talked about our system and our strategy in a smooth, practiced tone. I sat along the wall with my notebook and my calm smile. and I watched the investors' eyes do the thing they always did, that slight brightening when they saw the returns on the slides. I knew every number on that screen, because I'd made them possible. When the lunch ended, the men shook Graham's hand and thanked him for his brilliance. One of them glanced at me and offered a polite nod, like I was part of the decor. That night, after dinner, Graham took a call in the living room and spoke in a voice he reserved for people he wanted to impress. I rinsed plates at the sink, the water hot enough to sting. "You'll love it," he said into the phone, smiling. "It's time. The plan's solid. She won't see it coming." He turned slightly away from the kitchen when he said it, like the walls couldn't be trusted. I dried my hands and went upstairs without making noise. Later, when he finally came to bed, he smelled faintly like cologne that wasn't his. Something softer layered over it. I didn't ask. I didn't roll toward him. I just lay there, looking at the ceiling, listening to the HVAC kick on and off. The next day, I did something I almost never did. I took my lunch break away from the office. There was a cafe a few blocks over with small tables and worn wooden chairs. It smelled like espresso and sugar, and the windows were fogged from the cold outside. I ordered something simple and sat alone, my phone face down, just letting myself be a person without a role for half an hour. I'd just taken my first bite when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Stephanie, Graham's assistant. She walked in with a woman I didn't recognize. They ordered quickly and sat at the table directly behind me. Their chairs scraped the floor, and I could hear their bracelets clink when they moved. They were speaking in that excited, half-whisper people use when they think they're being discreet, even though the room is quiet enough to carry everything. "I swear, it's all set," Stephanie said. "Private room downtown. He wants it perfect." The other woman laughed softly. "So it's really happening?" "Oh, it's happening," Stephanie said. "He's been planning it for months, moving things around, making sure she doesn't have a leg to stand on." My fingers tightened around my fork. I kept chewing slowly, like my body hadn't heard what my mind had. The other woman said, "Does she still think it's just a party?" Stephanie made a sound like pity, but it wasn't kind. "She thinks it's a celebration," she said. "It's honestly almost sad." Then, like she couldn't help herself, she added, "And everyone knows about Lila." The name caught my attention because it was casual, like an obvious fact. "Everyone?" the woman asked. "Everyone except her," Stephanie said. "Lila's basically living in his life. It's only a matter of time before it's official." I didn't turn around. I didn't move quickly. I let the moment pass through me without giving it a reaction it could feed on. I slid my phone into my hand under the table and started a voice recording without looking at the screen. I didn't even know why at first. Instinct, maybe. Or the part of me that had always understood that proof mattered more than feelings. Their voices kept going for another minute, laughing at details I didn't want to hear. Then they stood and left, their chairs scraping back again, their perfume trailing behind them like a signature. I finished my lunch slowly, though I couldn't taste it. When I walked back to the office, the city air felt sharp, and my breath came out white in front of me. My hands were steady. My thoughts were not. That evening, I didn't confront Graham. I didn't cry in the shower. I didn't call my mother and unload everything in one shaking rush. Instead, I called someone I trusted. Her name was Rachel Wynn. We'd been close in grad school, the kind of friends who stayed in the lab late, sharing stale snacks and quiet jokes while the rest of the world slept. After graduation, she went into forensic accounting, the type of work that involves finding out where money goes when someone swears it didn't. We met at a small bar in an older neighborhood, the kind with dim lighting and wood booths that made you feel hidden. The air smelled like citrus and whiskey. I chose a seat with my back to the wall. Rachel took one look at my face and didn't ask if I was okay. She just waited, calm and patient, like she knew I'd speak when I was ready. I told her about the folder, the org chart, the memo, the voices in the hallway, the cafe conversation. I didn't dramatize it. I just laid out the facts the way I always had, line by line, like code. When I finished, Rachel stared at me for a moment with an expression that was too steady to be comforting. "This isn't just a divorce setup," she said finally. "He's not leaving you. He's erasing you." I nodded once. My throat felt tight, but my voice stayed even. "I figured." Rachel leaned forward, lowered her voice. "If you built the system, you need to protect it. And you need to protect yourself. Quietly." I didn't answer right away. I watched a couple at the bar laughing softly, unaware of anything outside their own little world. Then I looked back at Rachel. "Tell me what to do first," I said. She didn't smile. She didn't look impressed. She just nodded like we were starting a job. "Step 1, she said. "We document what's yours. Not memories, not stories. Proof. Dates. Versions. Ownership." I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and placed it on the table between us. I played the recording from the cafe, low enough that only we could hear. Rachel listened without blinking. When it ended, she let out a slow breath. "Okay," she said. "Now we move carefully." I nodded again, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something settle in my chest. Not hope, not anger. Clarity. When I got home that night, Graham was already asleep on the couch, his suit jacket tossed over the armrest, his phone still lit in his hand. The TV was muted, flickering silently. I stood there a moment in the doorway, looking at him, then at the phone. Then I walked upstairs, went into the guest bathroom, and locked the door behind me. I opened my laptop, the screen bright against the tile and white walls, and I pulled up the first set of files. Then I waited until my breathing slowed and my hands felt steady again. And I started making a list. I kept the bathroom light off and worked with the glow of the laptop screen. The house was quiet, except for the occasional creak of settling wood and the low rush of the heater kicking on. I sat on the edge of the tub with my knees close together, like I was making myself small out of habit. But my mind was already doing something else. I opened a plain text file and started listing what I knew. Not feelings, not theories, just facts. What I built, where the code lived, which machines it touched, what backups existed, which accounts controlled deployments, which names were on documents, and which names were missing. I wrote it the way I used to write project notes in grad school. Short lines, clear labels, a simple structure I could trust when I was tired. Then I opened the repository. Graham had always insisted that everything be kept under the company umbrella. Shared drives, shared credentials, shared access. He called it security. I called it convenience for him. He didn't like anything that depended on me in a way he had to admit out loud. But what he didn't understand was this. I built the system, so I built the habits around the system too. And habits leave trails. I pulled up the version history, the commit log, the timestamps. I had used my personal patterns without thinking, little markers in my naming conventions, the same way a person's handwriting leaves a signature. When I scrolled back far enough, I saw the early structure, the first skeleton I wrote before the firm even had an office. I copied the logs into a separate file and saved it in 3 places. Then I exported the repo in a format that would stand up to questions, something readable and verifiable without trusting a single platform. Next, I opened the folder Graham thought made him safe, the backup directory on our home server. There were mirrored copies of the trading engine, snapshots from earlier builds, even a few archived datasets that only I used when I was testing for drift. He insisted on those backups because he liked the idea of control. If anything ever went wrong, he wanted to believe he could restore it himself. He couldn't. I created an additional encrypted archive and stored it where he would not look, because he didn't respect it. Inside a dull directory labeled with something domestic and boring. Home maintenance, appliance manuals. The kind of thing men like Graham ignored because it didn't feel like power. I knew I was doing careful work, but I still checked my breathing every few minutes. Inhale, exhale. Keep the rhythm calm. Don't rush. When I was finished with the code, I turned to the money. That part was harder. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I understood it too well. Financial systems are full of polite language. Every theft has a soft name. Every trap looks like paperwork. Rachel had told me to think in steps, so I did. Step 1. Find the leverage that already existed. Not the leverage I wished I had, the leverage that was already tied into their lives. Over the years, Graham's parents had asked for help with their finances, in the way wealthy families do, with a smile that suggests it's a favor to be included. His mother would slide documents across a table after dinner. His father would talk about refinancing and interest rates as if it was dinner conversation. Graham's younger sister had trusts set up by a family attorney who charged too much and asked too few questions. His older sister had tuition payments for her kids routed through accounts that were structured in ways that looked tidy, but were not. When you're the quiet person at the table, you get handed the messy tasks because everyone assumes you don't mind. You take notes. You organize. You make things easier. And you learn where everything is. I pulled up the old emails. I searched my sent folder for subject lines like refinance, trust update, signature needed, wire details. I didn't open anything that felt like snooping. I opened the things they had asked me to handle. Then I created a timeline, a simple spreadsheet. Date, document, who requested it, what was signed, where the funds moved, which institutions were involved. By midnight, the picture was clean enough that I could see it from a distance. Graham had been building his life the way he built the firm, on the assumption that I would keep holding it up quietly. He had also been using my quietness as a shield. "Abigail handles it," he'd say, and people would nod like that meant it was taken care of. It was, just not in the way he thought. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The kitchen was cold on my bare feet. I made coffee. Not for him, for me. And I stood by the window while the sky started to lighten. I didn't feel dramatic. I felt awake. Graham came down still half asleep, hair slightly messy, and reached automatically for the mug I'd set out. "You're up early," he said, like it was surprising I existed before he needed something. "I couldn't sleep," I said. He shrugged, already moving toward his phone. "Big week," he muttered, as if that explained everything. He left without looking back. After he went, I did something I had avoided for years. I called an attorney. Not the family attorney Graham's parents used, not someone who played golf with Graham's partners. Someone Rachel recommended, a woman named Diane Park who had built her career on quiet, technical divorces and corporate disputes. The kind of work where you win by being accurate, not loud. Her office was downtown, in a building that smelled like polished stone and printer toner. When I arrived, the receptionist offered water in a paper cup and didn't ask personal questions. I appreciated that more than I expected. Diane came out herself. She was in her 40s, hair pulled back, glasses on a chain she didn't need but wore anyway. Her handshake was firm and brief. We sat in a small conference room with blinds half closed. The light came through in thin stripes across the table. Diane placed a legal pad in front of her and waited. I told her the truth the way I told Rachel, in clean lines. The system was mine. I built it. I could prove it. The firm relied on it. Graham pretended it was his. He was planning to remove me, erase me. Diane listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked one question, and her tone didn't change. "Do you want to save the marriage?" she said. "Or do you want to protect your work and your future?" I looked at the striped light on the table for a second and answered honestly. "I want to protect what's mine." Diane nodded once, like she'd expected that. "Okay," she said. "Then we move in order." She wrote 3 words on her pad and turned it slightly so I could see them. Ownership, evidence, control. "We don't threaten," she said. "We document, we secure, we prepare. And we let the facts do what facts do." I felt my shoulders drop a fraction. the way they do when someone speaks your language. Diane laid out practical boundaries. I needed to stop doing unpaid work that looked like assisting. I needed to keep a clean record of my contributions. I needed to separate personal assets and make sure I had access to cash. I needed a safe address. I needed copies of all key documents. And most importantly, I needed to avoid giving Graham a reason to suspect he was losing control, because suspicion makes sloppy people aggressive. When I left her office, it was still morning, and the city was already busy. I walked 2 blocks before I realized my hands weren't shaking. That afternoon, I went back to my own work with a different mindset. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was organizing. That night, I began building my own structure. Not revenge, not sabotage. A structure. I formed a small consulting entity under my maiden name. Nothing flashy. A plain name that sounded like it could belong to anyone. I opened a separate bank account. I set up a mailing address that wasn't our house. I moved a modest amount of money, nothing that would raise alarms, just enough to ensure I could breathe if everything turned hostile. I did the same with my IP. For years, I had treated the code like a shared household asset, the way you treat furniture you bought together even if you paid for it. Diane helped me see the difference between living like a couple and surviving like a person with something valuable. So I gathered what I had: old notebooks, early drafts, the first whiteboard photos from the home office, email threads where Graham asked me to tweak the model or fix the bug right before a big pitch, messages where he forwarded investor questions to me and said, "Need your magic." I printed the most important ones. I saved originals. I backed them up in multiple places. When you work with systems, you learn the value of redundancy. Then came the part I had been avoiding because it felt almost too simple. I changed the access. Not all of it, not yet. That would have been obvious. I began with the places Graham never touched: the documentation repository, the monitoring tools, the alerting rules, the backup encryption keys, the internal admin accounts. I rotated credentials slowly, like maintenance, like routine hygiene. I updated recovery emails and phone numbers where I could without triggering notifications. I set up a separate authenticator on a device he didn't know existed. I created audit logs that would show access patterns clearly if I ever needed to present them. Every change I made was small enough to look like normal upkeep, but taken together, they formed a fence. At the office, I started watching people more closely. Graham's new college friend began showing up, a man named Mark Devlin. He walked through the glass doors with that easy entitlement men bring when they've been promised a seat. He shook hands like he was already in charge. When Graham introduced him to the staff, he said, "Mark's here to help us scale. Big picture thinking." Then Graham looked at me, smiled, and said, "Abby will get you up to speed." Mark offered his hand to me like he was doing me a favor. His palm was dry and quick. "Great to meet you," he said. "Graham's told me you're organized." "Organized," I repeated lightly. He laughed, like we were sharing a joke. I didn't correct him. I didn't need to. I just looked at him for a second longer than polite, and then nodded. "I'll send you the documentation," I said. And I did. Just not all of it. I gave him the clean, surface-level overview, the kind of document you hand to someone who wants to sound competent without doing the work. I held back the deeper architecture, the logic behind the model, the fail-safes that kept it from collapsing under real market stress. Not because I was being petty, because it was mine. That week, the first sign that Graham was growing careless showed up in something small. He came home late on Wednesday and tossed his jacket over a chair. His phone buzzed on the counter while he washed his hands. The screen lit up with a name that wasn't in my contacts: Lila. The message preview was short. "Tomorrow night, same place. Don't be late." He picked up the phone before it buzzed again, but not before I saw the hotel logo in the notification bar. One of those downtown suites with a concierge and private elevators. The kind of place you can pretend is business if you want to lie to yourself. He looked up and saw me watching, and for a fraction of a second his face tightened. Then he smiled, like he hadn't been caught. "Work stuff," he said. "Okay," I replied. I rinsed my glass and set it in the drying rack. My movements stayed calm. My voice stayed neutral. Inside, I felt nothing dramatic. Just another data point dropping into place. After he went upstairs, I opened my laptop at the kitchen table and pulled up the florist's number from an old email thread. I remembered it because Graham had once asked me to handle something and forward him the invoice. He liked gifts that looked thoughtful without requiring thought. When the florist answered, I spoke in the same polite tone I used when ordering catering for investor meetings. "Hi," I said. "I'm calling to confirm a standing arrangement." She asked for the name on the account. I gave it. She confirmed weekly deliveries, pink and white peonies, special instructions, a note card message, and the delivery address. A downtown hotel suite. For the past 6 months. I thanked her and ended the call. Then I sat at the table with my hands folded, looking at the dark window in front of me, my reflection faint in the glass. I didn't feel surprised. I didn't even feel sad in the sharp way people expect. I felt finished with pretending. Upstairs, I heard the shower start. I opened the encrypted archive again and checked my copies one more time. Code, logs, emails, timeline. Everything where it needed to be. Then I pulled out a fresh document and began drafting a simple, unemotional summary for Diane. Dates, names, systems. Proof. I wrote until my eyes felt tired. Then I saved the file, closed the laptop, and put my phone face down. In the quiet, I could hear my own breathing. Then I waited. The next 2 weeks were ordinary on the surface. I went to work, I answered emails, I sat in meetings and kept my face neutral. I stocked the kitchen the way I always had. I asked Graham polite questions about his day and accepted his half answers like they were enough. But my attention stayed on details. At the office, Mark kept circling back, asking for deeper access. He wanted the core logic, the parts of the model that explained why it worked. He framed it as teamwork, as scaling, as leadership. I gave him tasks that looked important and stayed contained. Reports, performance summaries, documentation that described behavior but not the reasons behind it. Every time he asked for more, I nodded and said, "Let me clean it up first." He mistook my calm for compliance. At home, Graham became more careless. He stopped pretending he was exhausted. He started disappearing with excuses that didn't bother to sound believable. When he did speak to me, it was mostly instructions. "Make sure you're free Friday night. I booked the private room. Wear something nice. Don't embarrass me." The night after he said that, I opened my notes and wrote a new heading. Birthday dinner. Then I broke it into steps the way Diane had taught me to. Step 1. Make sure I can leave cleanly. Not emotionally clean, logistically clean. I visited a small storage place near the edge of the city where nobody knew my name. I rented the smallest unit and paid for 3 months up front. I brought a few things over in plain tote bags, nothing dramatic. Copies of documents, a spare laptop, a small cash envelope, clothes that felt like me, not like a costume he picked. I kept it boring on purpose. Boring is invisible. Step 2. Confirm what I own. Rachel helped me here without ever raising her voice. She gave me a checklist and a calm look that said, "Keep going." We documented the system from multiple angles, not just my code logs, the design decisions, the testing framework, the alerts, the way the model behaved in market conditions that were hard to fake. We pulled old calendars and meeting invites that showed Graham forwarding technical questions to me. We traced the first time the engine appeared in pitch decks, before the firm's branding had even settled. It was work I could do with my eyes half closed. That helped. Facts don't argue. Step 3. Set boundaries around the collapse. This was Diane's language, and I understood it right away. The goal was not chaos. The goal was inevitability. If the board tried to pressure me, I needed leverage that didn't depend on persuasion. If Graham tried to claim the system, I needed proof that didn't depend on anyone liking me. If he tried to bury me, I needed a way to surface the truth without shouting. So I built a controlled lock. Not something that would break everything at random, something that would simply stop letting them use what wasn't theirs. I created triggers tied to administrative access and authorization. If certain permissions changed, if my credentials were removed, if the system was copied into a new environment without my keys, the platform would go into a protective state. It would not delete anything. It would not destroy data. It would pause, freeze, lock down in a way that forced a conversation in reality instead of ego. I tested it carefully, quietly, in a sandbox environment first, then in small slices on the real one, the way you roll out any update that matters. Every change produced a log entry. Every log entry had a timestamp. When it was finished, I sat back and watched the monitoring dashboard for a few minutes. Everything stayed stable. That was the point. Then I closed the laptop and went upstairs like it was a normal night. A few days later, my mother called and said she wanted to visit. Her voice was warm and steady, the way it had been my entire life. "I've got a few days off," she said. "I'd like to see you." I told her yes before I could overthink it. When she arrived, she brought the smell of rain and laundry soap with her, and she hugged me like she could feel what I wasn't saying. Graham was at the office, and for a few hours the house felt like it belonged to me again. That night, at the kitchen table, she watched me stir tea I wasn't drinking. "You're doing that thing," she said. "What thing?" "Keeping your voice even when something's wrong." I didn't argue. I didn't deny it. I told her the basics, not every detail, but enough. The folder, the plan to remove me, the name on the phone, the private room birthday dinner that wasn't really for me. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "I need you to promise me something," she said. "What?" "When the moment comes, you leave. No explaining, no pleading, no staying to be reasonable." I nodded once. The next morning, while Graham was out, she helped me pack a small go bag the way she used to pack for emergencies when I was a kid. Documents, a spare set of keys, a charger, basic medication, cash. Nothing that looked like panic, just readiness. We hid it in the basement behind boxes Graham never touched. Old holiday decorations and broken sports equipment he couldn't be bothered to throw away. Before my mother left, she hugged me again, tighter this time. "Call me when you're ready," she said, "even if it's late." After she drove away, I stood at the window and watched her car disappear down the street. The house felt quiet in a different way. Not empty, just honest. The day of my birthday arrived, and Graham treated it like a performance rehearsal. He laid out dresses on the bed, as if he were choosing outfits for someone else. "Wear this one," he said, tapping a fitted dress that looked expensive and uncomfortable. "It photographs well." "I'll choose," I said calmly. He turned his head, surprised by the smallest resistance, then smiled like it was cute. "Fine," he said. "Just don't make it weird." After he left the room, I opened my closet and pulled out a simple black dress I'd owned before I married him. It fit without forcing me into a version of myself that felt borrowed. In my purse, I placed the black envelope. Inside it was not drama, not threats, just the parts that mattered, arranged with care. Copies, timelines, proof of ownership. A short letter Diane wrote in plain language, the kind that reads like a door closing. I checked it once, then sealed it, then put it back into my purse. That evening, Graham drove us downtown in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other on his phone. Messages flashed on the screen, and he angled it away from me like a reflex. When we arrived, the lobby smelled like polished wood and perfume. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped in beside him, feeling the envelope press lightly against my side. I watched the floor numbers rise, and kept my face calm. Then the elevator chimed, and the doors slid open. The private room was already full when we walked in. A long table, low, warm lighting, glassware lined up like a display. The air smelled like seared meat, butter, and expensive cologne. Conversations overlapped in a steady hum, the kind that sounds confident because it doesn't have to be careful. Graham's hand rested on my back as he guided me forward. It wasn't affectionate. It was directional, like steering someone into place. I saw the place cards first. His was centered at the head of the table, bold lettering, perfectly positioned. Mine was farther down, near the end, tucked between two younger women whose faces I recognized only from holiday parties and office photos. And beside Graham's seat was a name card that didn't belong to his family. Lila Mercer. She looked up as we entered. She didn't stare. She didn't smirk. Her expression was controlled, almost professional, like she'd already rehearsed how to look innocent. Her hand was resting lightly on Graham's arm as if it belonged there. Graham didn't move away. Across from her sat Mark Devlin, already laughing with one of Graham's partners, already acting as if he'd been invited into the center of everything. Graham's mother stood near the sideboard and air-kissed my cheek. "Happy birthday, Abigail," she said, and her eyes held that quiet pity that's meant to sound like kindness. "Thank you," I replied. I took my seat without hesitation. The chair was upholstered and slightly too low, forcing my shoulders forward if I relaxed. I kept my posture upright. The early part of the dinner unfolded like a program. First course, second course, wine poured without anyone asking. People told stories about business trips, golf weekends, and renovations. The table laughed in coordinated waves, like everyone understood who was allowed to be funny. No one asked me questions beyond polite ones. "How are you? Are you still doing yoga? How's the house?" I answered with calm, short sentences and let the conversation move past me the way it always had. Every so often I watched Graham. He was in performance mode, leaning back, glass in hand, speaking as if the room existed to admire him. He touched Lila's hand once under the table. It wasn't hidden well. It didn't need to be. Mark kept glancing down toward me occasionally, like he was checking that I was still in my assigned role. I noticed small things that people miss when they're busy enjoying themselves. Graham's sister kept checking her phone between bites, distracted. One of the partners had a new watch and kept turning his wrist toward the light so it caught. Graham's father laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. The staff moved in and out quietly, placing plates, refilling water, clearing silverware with soft clinks that sounded almost like counting. By the time dessert arrived, the room had settled into that comfortable buzz that comes right before someone believes they're about to win. A rich chocolate dessert was placed in front of me with a single candle. Someone started singing, half-hearted at first, then louder when Graham lifted his hand and smiled like a conductor. I looked at the candle flame and made a small wish that wasn't a wish at all, just a decision. I would not beg. When the singing ended, people clapped politely. I didn't lean forward to blow the candle out. I just sat there, hands folded lightly in my lap, and waited. Graham stood up. He tapped his glass once with a spoon. The sound rang clear and sharp, and the room quieted immediately. He loved this part. He loved the moment where everyone looked at him and stayed still. "Before we toast Abigail's birthday," he said, voice smooth, "I want to share something." He paused, letting anticipation build. People smiled. A few leaned in. Someone chuckled like they already knew the punchline. Graham looked right at me, and I saw a brief flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. Not anger, not sadness. Satisfaction. Like he'd finally arranged the pieces the way he wanted. "Congratulations," he said, and his voice softened in a way that sounded almost tender. Then it sharpened again. "You failed." A few people laughed too early. Others followed a second later when they realized it was safe. Graham raised his glass higher. "We're finished," he added, like he was announcing a promotion. The laughter came louder this time, spreading down the table. Glasses clinked. Someone cheered. Lila pressed her lips together in a small smile, then lifted her own glass delicately like she'd been trained. I didn't react. I let the laughter run its course and fall back into silence on its own. I watched faces change as people realized I wasn't playing my part. Then I reached into my purse. The black envelope felt firm and flat under my fingers, the edges crisp. I stood up slowly, not to create drama, but because sitting no longer made sense. The room quieted again, not because Graham asked it to, but because uncertainty is louder than a toast. I walked along the side of the table. My heels made a steady sound on the floor, one step after another. I didn't hurry. I didn't look at anyone for too long. When I reached Graham, I placed the envelope in front of him and slid it forward until it touched the base of his glass. "Before you keep celebrating," I said, voice even, "you might want to explain a few things." Graham's smile tightened. He glanced down at the envelope like it was something dirty. I kept going, not louder, not softer. "Explain to your sisters why their tuition payments stopped today." I looked briefly toward his sister, who had gone still. "Explain to your parents why the house and the cars are about to be flagged." His father's face shifted from amusement to confusion. "And explain to your partners why the firm's platform is going to pause before the next settlement window." Nobody laughed. The silence wasn't dramatic. It was practical, like a room realizing the power just changed hands, and it needs a second to adjust. Graham's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. His eyes moved across the table, searching for reassurance. He didn't find it. One phone buzzed, then another, a third, a string of small vibrations like insects trapped under glass. His sister's face drained of color as she looked down at her screen. One of the partners stood halfway out of his chair, already reaching for his phone like he could physically pull the problem back. Graham stared at me. "What is this?" he said, but his voice didn't have the confidence it started with. "It's the truth," I replied. "Organized." I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I didn't offer comfort. I turned away from him and walked toward the door. Behind me, voices started rising, overlapping in confusion. "What's happening? Did you get that alert? Call the bank. Who is she calling?" A glass tipped over somewhere. I heard liquid spill. Someone cursed under their breath. The door closed softly behind me, and for a moment the hallway outside the private room felt cooler, quieter, like stepping into a different world. I walked past the elevator, past the hostess stand, past the front doors. The main dining room was full of strangers enjoying their own meals, unaware of what was unraveling 2 rooms away. Outside, the night air hit my face clean and cold. The city sounded steady, traffic moving, people passing, life continuing without caring about anyone's humiliation. My phone vibrated once in my purse, then again. I didn't look. I crossed the street to where my car was parked, opened the door, and sat down. The leather seat was cool against my back. I set my purse in the passenger seat and took the black envelope's twin from the side pocket, the one with my own copies. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I opened my laptop instead. The screen lit up the inside of the car in soft blue. I connected to the secure dashboard I'd built, the one that showed system status, account changes, and automated triggers in plain, quiet lines. Everything was still stable. For now. Across the street, through the restaurant's windows, I could see movement, bodies turning, phones pressed to ears, the shape of panic forming without anyone saying the word. I placed my phone face down on the console. Then I rested my hands lightly on the laptop and watched the first notification begin to load. The first notification wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of message systems send when something is no longer authorized. Access change detected. Protective state enabled. A second line appeared underneath it. Trade execution paused. Administrative review required. I watched the timestamps roll in. Clean, precise. Each one a small door closing. Inside the restaurant, the movement intensified. Through the glass, I could see Graham's father pacing, phone pressed to his ear, his mouth moving fast. One of the partners stepped away from the table, walking in tight circles like he could outpace the problem. Graham stayed seated for a few seconds, frozen, then stood abruptly, his chair scraping back. My phone buzzed again. I didn't pick it up. I didn't need to hear the panic to understand it. I had built the machine they depended on. I knew exactly how quickly their confidence would turn into fear once they couldn't press the usual buttons. I didn't sit there long. The goal was never to watch them suffer. The goal was to leave cleanly. I closed the laptop, started the car, and drove away. The city lights blurred past the windshield. The streets were wet enough to reflect everything, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving forward instead of circling the same small room. I drove to the condo I'd rented quietly months earlier under the consulting entity. It was simple, on a quiet street near the water, in a building with a front desk that didn't ask personal questions, as long as your key worked. Inside, the air smelled like fresh paint and the faint lemon scent of new cleaning products. There were books on a shelf I'd chosen, a small table by the window, a single plant I hadn't killed yet because it didn't need much. I set my purse down, took off my shoes, and went straight to the kitchen. I made tea. Not because I was celebrating, because tea is what my hands do when my mind has done too much. It gives the body something normal to hold on to. When I sat at the table, I opened the laptop again and checked the dashboard. The protective state was holding. Execution still paused. Audit logs were recording each access attempt. Then the calls started coming in faster. Graham, Mark, Graham's mother. Numbers I didn't recognize, probably partners. I let them ring. I put the phone face down. Then I waited. By the next morning, the firm was in a controlled crisis. Rachel texted me early, a short message without emotion. "They're in emergency meetings. They don't know what you have." I replied with one sentence. "They will." A few hours later, Diane called. "I'm getting outreach," she said. "They're trying to frame this as sabotage." "Is it working?" "No," she replied, "because we planned for this. Don't speak to them directly, not yet." "I won't." "Good," she said. "Let them show their behavior. It becomes part of the record." That afternoon, the board issued a notice calling for an internal review. They didn't name me, but it was obvious who they meant. I spent the day doing simple things. I took a walk by the lake. The air was cold. The water looked like steel. People were out jogging, walking dogs, living their lives without any awareness of what had happened in that private room. I stopped at a grocery store and bought plain food: fruit, bread, eggs. The kind of purchases that remind you you're still a person with a body, not just a mind with a plan. Back at the condo, I opened my laptop and wrote an email to Diane and Rachel with a clean update. System status, log highlights, any inbound legal threats, a short timeline. Then I closed the laptop. I did not check social media. I did not search for gossip. I did not read messages from people who were suddenly concerned. Silence was not weakness. It was control. On the fourth morning, the doorbell rang at 7:20 a.m. I knew it was him before I looked. I walked to the door, looked through the peephole, and saw Graham standing in the hallway. His suit was wrinkled, his hair uncombed, his jaw rough with stubble. He looked smaller without an audience. I didn't open the door right away. I stood there, breathed once, and let my face settle into neutral. Then I opened it. I stayed in the doorway, not inviting him in. He blinked when he saw me, as if he expected a different version of me. "Abigail," he said, and his voice sounded hoarse. "Please." "Please what?" I asked. He swallowed. "Everything's locked," he said. "The platform, our accounts. My parents are getting notices. The partners are losing their minds." I nodded once, as if he were describing a weather forecast. "Tell me how to fix it," he said. "Whatever you want. Money, An apology? Just fix it. I held my mug with both hands. The warmth was steady. You can't fix it, I said. His face tightened.
What do you mean I can't? You did it. You can undo it.
I kept my voice level. This is what happens when you build on something you don't own, I said. It stops being available the moment the owner steps away. He stared at me like he didn't understand the language. Then, he reached into his coat and pulled out a thick envelope. Here, he said. My lawyers prepared this. They're saying you're in breach. They're saying... I didn't take it. I'm represented, I said. You can send it to Diane. His jaw clenched, and for a second I saw the old him, the one who believed anger could reset a situation. You're destroying me, he said. I didn't argue. I'm not destroying anything, I said. I'm stepping out of what isn't mine to carry. His eyes flicked around the hallway, like he was trying to find someone else to blame. I made you, he said, and even as he spoke it, the line sounded weak. I looked at him without emotion. No, I said. You used me. His mouth opened, then shut. Behind him, the elevator doors opened and closed with a soft chime. A neighbor walked past with a gym bag, glanced once, and kept going. Nobody cared. That mattered. Graham's shoulders sagged. Just tell me what you want, he said again, quieter now. I sipped my coffee. I want you to leave, I said. He stood there for a moment longer, eyes wet but not with remorse, with panic. Then he turned and walked away. The next day, Diane forwarded me the formal outreach from the firm's counsel. It was predictable. Accusations, demands, threats written in expensive language. Diane's response was calm and short. She attached evidence, version logs, ownership filings, email threads, a timeline showing that the system existed before the firm's key accounts came in, documentation that tied my work directly to the firm's revenue. No insults, no emotion, just proof. Within 48 hours, the tone changed. Suddenly, they wanted to negotiate. The board requested an emergency meeting. Diane asked me one question. Are you ready to be seen, she said, or do you want to keep doing this from the shadows? I didn't hesitate. I'm ready, I said. The meeting was held in the firm's downtown office, in the same glass conference room where I used to refill water glasses and sit outside the circle. When I walked in this time, I carried my laptop and a thin folder, and I didn't apologize for taking space. The board members were already seated. So were Graham and Mark. Graham looked like he hadn't slept. Mark kept his chin up, but his eyes were restless, the way they get when someone realizes they don't actually understand the system they were bragging about. Diane sat beside me, calm, still. Rachel was on video call, her face steady on the screen. One of the board members spoke first. Abigail, he said, careful. We need this resolved quickly. I nodded. I agree, I said. Another leaned forward. What do you want? He asked. To restore operations? I opened my laptop, connected it to the conference screen, and pulled up a simple diagram. Not the code, not the details. The ownership web. The parts I had documented. The filings Diane had prepared. The evidence trail Rachel helped audit. Every critical component you rely on, I said, belongs to me. Graham shifted in his chair like he wanted to interrupt, but he didn't. His confidence was gone. He was waiting to see what reality allowed. One of the board members cleared his throat. That's a big claim, he said. I looked at him calmly. It's a documented claim, I said. You've already received the documentation. Silence settled over the table. Then I laid out the terms, the way Diane and I had prepared them. No speeches, no revenge, just boundaries. My work is not a marital asset you can reassign, I said, and I will not continue to operate as an unpaid support person while others take credit. A board member asked, Are you demanding control of the firm? I shook my head. No, I said. I'm demanding control of what's mine. I slid a printed term sheet across the table. Diane's language. Clear. Direct. An equity stake tied to the system's value, not to my role. A formal executive title that matched reality. Full separation from personal obligations Graham had tied me to. And an immediate agreement that any retaliation would trigger disclosure of the full evidentiary package to regulators and investors. I didn't say it like a threat. I said it like a rule. Graham's face went tight. "You can't do this," he murmured. I looked at him briefly. "I already did," I replied. The board read in silence. Papers rustled. Someone tapped a pen, then stopped when they realized the sound was too loud. After a long minute, one of the board members looked up. "If we agree," he said, "operations resume?" I nodded. "When ownership is recognized and terms are signed," I said. "Yes." Graham stood abruptly, pushing his chair back. "This is insane," he said, voice rising. The room stiffened, and a few board members looked uncomfortable, but I didn't react. I waited. Diane spoke without looking at him. "Sit down, Mr. Whitaker," she said calmly. "This is a corporate matter now." Graham froze, then sat again, breathing hard. The board member who seemed most practical looked at the others. "Sign," he said quietly, "or we lose everything." They signed within the hour. When the final signature was placed, I opened the laptop and entered the authorization key. The dashboard showed the protective state releasing in phases, controlled, logged, reversible only by me. Execution resumed. The system did what it always did. It worked. As I closed the laptop, I didn't feel triumph. I felt relief. Not because he was hurt, because I was no longer invisible. That evening, I went back to the condo and made tea again. I sat by the window and watched the lake turn dark under the early winter sky. My phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. One line. "You took everything." I didn't answer. I blocked it, set the phone down, and opened a clean notebook. I wrote one sentence at the top of the page. Next steps. Build a life that doesn't require permission. The week after the board meeting was quiet in a way I hadn't felt in years. Not empty, not sad, just quiet. I didn't go back to the suburban house. Diane handled the formal separation steps, and I stayed in the condo by the water. I kept my routine simple on purpose. I woke early. I made coffee. I walked along the lake when the air still felt clean and the city hadn't fully woken up. I noticed details again. Small ones. Like my mind had room to be observant without being braced for impact. The sound of gulls in the morning. The texture of cold air in my throat. The way my shoulders sat lower when nobody was watching me for obedience. The firm ran again, but I didn't stay involved the way they expected. Once the paperwork recognized what should have been recognized from the beginning, the glass offices felt different. Not hostile, just wrong for me. Like returning to a room where you spent years whispering, even after you're allowed to speak normally. Diane and I reviewed options. Keep the stake, run it, she said, practical. Or sell the core system and walk. I chose the second option. Not because I wanted to punish anyone, because I wanted distance. I wanted my work to stop being the thing that kept me tied to Graham's name, his culture, his people, his habits. Rachel helped me prepare the valuation, the kind of clean, defensible number that holds up when anyone tries to argue. We spoke in short calls. We didn't dwell on the past. The sale moved fast once it started. A larger competitor wanted the system and didn't care about the drama behind it. They cared about performance, and the performance spoke for itself. When the deal closed, I sat at my kitchen table with a plain cup of tea and looked at the confirmation notice on my laptop. A number big enough to feel unreal for a second. Then I shut the laptop. I washed the mug. I took out the trash. I did one normal thing after another until the number felt like just another fact. A month later, I leased a small office downtown with a view of the water. Nothing flashy, just clean lines, good light, quiet hallways, and a front door that had my name on it. Garcia Quant Works. On the first day, the sign installer asked me to confirm the spelling. He held the clipboard out. I looked at my last name printed in bold letters, then signed under it without hesitation. I hired slowly. Not based on charm, not based on pedigree, based on work. I reached out to women I'd met over the years, the ones who had done the actual thinking in rooms where someone else collected the applause. People who didn't need to talk loudly to be competent. The first was Nora, a risk modeler from a major bank who had been assisting a director for 6 years while he took credit for her breakthroughs. She arrived for the interview in a simple coat, hair pulled back, eyes cautious. She spoke carefully at first. Then I asked her to walk me through a model she'd built. Her voice steadied. Her sentences got cleaner. She started pointing at the board like she trusted the math more than the room. I offered her the job on the spot. The second was Maya, an engineer who had optimized execution speed for a trading desk, then watched someone with a louder voice present it as his own. She didn't talk much in the interview. She didn't need to. She opened her laptop and showed me the work. That was enough. By the time we brought on a third teammate, the office felt like a place where contributions were named properly, where credit wasn't a currency you had to fight for, where the work could be serious without anyone needing to make someone else small to feel large. Our first client came through a referral, not through a dinner party. A small family office that wanted stability more than spectacle. They didn't ask who my husband was. They didn't ask who I used to be. They asked what the system did, how it handled risk, how it responded when markets turned ugly. I answered calmly. We signed. Within weeks, more inquiries came in. Quiet ones, the kind that arrive when people realize competence is easier to trust than charisma. I didn't look for news about Graham, but it found me anyway. An old colleague sent me a screenshot one evening, a short business update. Whitaker Capital was shrinking, clients leaving, partners distancing themselves. No mention of me, not directly, but I could read the truth between the lines. There were also investigations, the kind that happen when people start pulling threads and realize the fabric was never as clean as it looked. Diane told me only what mattered. Keep your boundaries, she said. Let the process run. I did. One afternoon, months later, I attended a conference. Not as someone's spouse, not as an accessory at the edge of the room. I was there to speak about model integrity and risk behavior under stress. Backstage, I stood in front of a mirror and adjusted the microphone wire on my collar. My hands were steady. My face looked calm. Through the side curtain, I saw him. Graham was across the exhibit hall at a small booth with cheap banners. He wore a suit that didn't fit right anymore. He smiled too much at passers-by who barely slowed down. He kept offering business cards like they were life preservers. Our eyes met for a moment. He looked tired. Not wounded in a way that made me feel anything. Just tired, like someone who had spent too long trying to live off borrowed work. He looked away first. I didn't stare. I didn't savor it. I just turned back and walked onto the stage when they called my name. The room was full. People listened. I spoke plainly, not trying to impress anyone, just explaining what I knew. When I finished, the applause was polite and real. No laughter, no cruelty, no performance. Afterward, I went back to my office, made tea, and sat by the window while the lake turned silver under the evening light. I thought about my mother and the way her hand had covered mine at the kitchen table. I thought about how she'd told me to leave cleanly, and how that advice had saved me from wasting energy on proving anything to people who didn't deserve proof. Then I opened a folder on my desk labeled Foundation. I had been working on it quietly, piece by piece. A small grant program for women in technical fields who needed legal help to protect their work. Mentorship support. Resources that were boring on paper and powerful in real life. The first recipients weren't celebrities. They weren't loud. They were just talented and tired. One of them, A woman I'd met through a referral reminded me of myself years earlier. Not because her story matched mine, but because her posture did. The careful way she spoke, the way she kept looking for permission to exist.
She didn't need permission. She needed a structure that didn't punish her for being calm.
That's the part I think about now when people ask if I won. I didn't win a fight. I left a system that depended on my silence, and I built one that didn't. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. A short sentence. "I can't believe you did that to me." I didn't reply. I blocked the number, set the phone down, and washed my mug. Then I waited until the kitchen was clean, the lights were off, and the room felt settled again. Before I end, I'll tell you something I've learned since then. A lot of women don't lose their work in one dramatic moment. They lose it slowly, through helpful favors and small credits that never arrive. Sometimes it looks like a relationship. Sometimes it looks like a job. Sometimes it looks like family.
And sometimes, all they need is one clear step to start protecting themselves without turning into someone they don't recognize. If you're still here with me, thank you for listening. If you like stories told calmly, with the details that matter, tap like and subscribe. It helps the space reach people who need it. And tell me in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I read those more than you'd think. 2 popular stories will appear next, and I'll see you in the next one.